In the 15 years since Mexican Emperor Agustin de Iturbide signed the first permit for the settlement of Anglo-Americans in Texas for Stephen F. Austin's colony, Texans had been settling into the new Spanish territory and began eyeing independence from Mexico. In 1824, as more Anglo-Americans began receiving land grants from impresarios, the need for a federal government became evident. So the Mexican Federal Constitution of 1824 was put into place, followed by the Colonization Act of 1825. This act resulted in the rush of colonists into Texas, mostly from the southern United States, many bringing with them their enslaved people. In 1827, Mexican President Guadalupe Victoria named Brigadier General Jose Manuel Muir to lead a scientific and boundary expedition into Texas to observe the natural resources and the Indians. Included in his orders, he was to determine the number and attitudes of the Americans living there. Upon his return to Mexico City in 1829, he reported to the Boundary Commission, recommending that Mexico begin taking strong measures to prevent the United States from acquiring Texas. He found that Anglo-Americans outnumbered Mexicans and that only a few had loyalty toward Mexico. As a result, Mexico initiated the law of April 6, 1830. Among other issues, it was designed to limit land grants given to colonists, therefore limited migration into Texas, including the transportation of enslaved people into the area. This act, while it was intended to give Mexico more military control in Texas, as well as to collect taxes from the colonists, actually was the impetus behind the Texas Revolution. Enforcement of the provisions of the law concerning establishment of custom houses resulted directly in the Anahuac disturbances of 1832, and indirectly in the Battle of Velasco, the Convention of 1832 and 1833, and the accumulation of grievances that helped lead to the Texas Revolution. Stephen F. Austin was selected to present the petition resulting from the Convention of 1833 to newly elected President Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna in Mexico City. One of the items listed in the petition was the separation of Coahuila and Texas. Disappointment in the denial of his provision resulted in Austin writing a letter to the government in San Antonio, requesting the separation without federal government approval. When the letter was received, Austin was immediately arrested and imprisoned in Mexico City until July of 1835. Meanwhile, Santa Anna was actively replacing the liberal Constitution of 1824 with a centralist government, giving the military control over all governmental activities in Texas. By the time Austin was released from prison, Sam Houston was leading Texas against Santa Anna's reign to take back Texas with force, beginning with the Battle of Gonzales. When the Alamo fell under command of William Travis in March of 1836, the news that Santa Anna's army was marching east caused fear and panic, leading to the mass exodus of settlers to safer ground in Galveston and along the Seguin River in Louisiana. Then, James Fannon's men were massacred at Goliad. General Sam Houston himself began a retreat of his forces, leaving large areas undefended, and causing even more settlers to drop everything and leave their homes and belongings behind. The Runaway Scrape was an event seeing mostly women and children fleeing in panic from central and eastern Texas, not just from the Mexican army, but from their vulnerability over the lack of defense from Indian attacks. Most men were away in the army throughout the colony. The episode choked roadways and saw illness, hypothermia, starvation, and death all along the way. Those who died were buried in the place where they fell, with no one taking the time to stop long enough for a formal ceremony. It wasn't until reliable news reached the refugees of the victory at San Jacinto that they began making their way back into Texas. Some didn't even have homes to go back to, as Santa Anna burned whole settlements on his way to the coast. Secretary of War Rusk later commended the women of Texas who held their families together during the flight, while their men volunteered to fight. He said, and I quote, "The men of Texas deserve much credit, but more was due the women. Armed men facing a foe could not be more brave, but the women, with their little children all around them, without means of defense or power to resist, faced danger and death with unflinching courage."